Absolutely not, Sarah. I don't care what kind of personal emergency you think you have. The Peterson account presentation is next week, and I need everyone focused and present. Victoria Marshall's voice cut through the air like a knife, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her mahogany desk as she stared me down. I stood my ground, clutching the medical leave request form in my trembling hands. Ms. Marshall, please. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. The patient. The patient. She interrupted, her red lips curling into a sneer. You're an account executive, Sarah, not a nurse. Whatever medical drama you're caught up in isn't our concern. This is a marketing firm, not a charity. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I understand that, but this is different. He has no one else, and his condition is deteriorating rapidly. I just need 1 week. Enough. Victoria slammed her hand on the desk, making me jump. I've heard enough of your excuses. You've been distracted for weeks, taking long lunches, leaving early. Now you want a whole week off right before our biggest presentation of the year. The answer is no. I felt my chest tighten. Victoria had always been harsh, but this was different. This was cruel. Ms. Marshall, I've never taken a sick day in 3 years. I've worked every holiday, every weekend you've asked. I'm just asking for this one. 1 week that could cost us millions, she cut in, standing up to her full height. At 5'10" in her designer heels, she towered over me. Do you have any idea what the Peterson account means to this firm? Of course you don't. You're too wrapped up in your little humanitarian project to see the bigger picture. The way she said humanitarian project made it sound like a dirty word. I thought about the man lying in a hospital bed across town, his kind eyes and gentle smile despite the pain he was in. He didn't deserve to die alone just because Victoria Marshall couldn't see past her quarterly projections. I'm taking a week, I said quietly but firmly. I'll work remotely nights, weekends, whatever it takes. But I need to be there for him. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you defying me, Sarah? I'm doing what's right. She laughed, a cold, harsh sound that echoed through her corner office. What's right? Let me tell you what's right. What's right is doing your job. What's right is being a team player. What's right is understanding that in this business, we don't have the luxury of playing Mother Teresa. I stood there, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. I understand if you need to write me up or dock my pay, but I'm taking a week. Victoria walked around her desk slowly, like a predator circling its prey. Oh, I'll do better than that. She picked up my leave request form and tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. You're fired. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let her see me flinch. You're firing me for requesting medical leave. I'm firing you for insubordination, poor performance, and failure to prioritize company interests. She smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. Enjoy unemployment, Sarah. I'm sure your patient will appreciate your sacrifice. I should have felt devastated. 3 years of my life, countless 60-hour weeks, all the missed family events and canceled vacations, all gone in an instant. But standing there in Victoria's office, watching her smug satisfaction, I felt something else entirely, relief. Thank you for making this decision easier, I said, turning to leave. Oh, and Sarah, Victoria called after me. Don't bother asking for a reference. As far as I'm concerned, you never worked here. I walked out of her office with my head held high, ignoring the curious stares of my soon-to-be ex-coworkers. My hands were steady as I packed up my desk, carefully placing my photos and personal items into a cardboard box. Jenny from accounting hurried over, her face full of concern. Sarah, what happened? I heard raised voices. Victoria fired me, I said simply, wrapping my favorite coffee mug in newspaper. What? She can't do that. Not over medical leave. I smiled at Jenny's outrage. She can, and she did. But it's okay, really. And surprisingly, it was. As I walked out of the glass and steel building that had been my professional home for the past 3 years, I felt lighter than I had in months. My career might be in shambles, but I knew I was doing the right thing. The hospital was a 20-minute drive from the office. As I navigated through mid-A traffic, I thought about how I'd ended up here. It had started. Thomas Edwards didn't look like a man worth millions. In his faded hospital gown, with his silver hair thinning and his face gaunt from chemotherapy, he looked like any other patient. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, bright, alert, and filled with a kindness that seemed to defy his circumstances. "The Great Gatsby again," he'd said when I walked in with the book. "Don't you think that's a bit on the nose for a cancer ward?" I laughed, surprised by his humor. "Would you prefer something more upbeat?" I have the bell jar in my back. That had made him laugh too, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to brighten the sterile hospital room. We'd spent the next hour talking about literature, life, and everything in between. By the time I left, I knew I'd met someone special. Over the next few weeks, I found myself visiting Thomas more frequently. He told me about his life, how he built his investment firm from nothing, how he'd lost his wife to cancer 15 years ago, how his children were scattered across the globe, too busy with their own lives to visit their dying father. "It's my own fault," he'd said without bitterness. "I spent so many years building my empire, I forgot to build relationships. Now look at me, all the money in the world and not a soul to share it with." But that wasn't entirely true anymore. Because he had me. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, grabbing my box of belongings from the passenger seat. As I walked through the familiar corridors toward Thomas's room, I thought about Victoria's words, "Enjoy unemployment." She had no idea that some things were worth more than a steady paycheck or a corner office. Thomas was awake when I walked in, his face lighting up despite the obvious pain he was in. "Sarah, what are you doing here so early? Don't you have work?" I set my box down and pulled up my usual chair beside his bed. "Change of plans. Looks like I'll be able to spend more time here after all." He studied my face carefully, his keen intelligence not dulled by illness or medication. "What happened?" "I got fired," I said simply. "My boss didn't appreciate me requesting medical leave to be here with you." "Sarah," his voice was filled with concern. "You shouldn't have done that. Not for me. I'm not worth—" "Don't," I interrupted gently. "Don't say you're not worth it. Every human being deserves to have someone by their side during times like this. Besides," I added with a smile, "that job was slowly killing my soul anyway." He chuckled weakly. "Well, when you put it that way," his expression turned serious. "But what will you do now?" I shrugged, trying to appear more confident than I felt. "I'll figure something out. Right now, let's focus on getting your pain levels under control. The nurse mentioned you refused your morning medication." Thomas looked sheepish. "It makes me too groggy. I hate not being able to think clearly. And I hate seeing you in pain," I countered, reaching for the call button. "Let's compromise. Take the medication, and I'll read to you until you fall asleep." I brought a new book. He raised an eyebrow. "Please tell me it's not the bell jar." We both laughed, and for a moment, the weight of everything, my lost job, his illness, the uncertainty of the future, seemed to lift. The nurse came in with Thomas's medication, and I settled in to read, pulling out a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. As I read, watching Thomas slowly relax as the pain medication took effect, I thought about how sometimes the biggest sacrifices lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Victoria Marshall thought she was punishing me, but in reality, she'd given me something priceless, the freedom to be exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I needed to do. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a story that would change both our lives forever. The next few days fell into a rhythm. I'd arrive at the hospital early in the morning, armed with books, crossword puzzles, and an endless supply of terrible jokes that somehow always made Thomas smile. We'd talk for hours about his business empire, my dreams of starting my own marketing consultancy, the books we loved, the lives we lived. Between monitoring his medication schedule and coordinating with his medical team, I learned more about Thomas Edwards the man, not just Thomas Edwards the patient. I learned about his first business venture, a failed computer repair shop in the 1980s that taught him more about resilience than any success ever could. I learned about his late wife, Margaret, and how her passion for art had influenced his early investment choices in emerging digital art platforms. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the room, Thomas asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Why did you really give up your job for me, Sarah?" I looked up from the newspaper crossword we'd been working on together. "I told you." "You told me what you thought I needed to hear," he interrupted gently. "But I want the truth." I set the newspaper aside, considering his question. "Do you remember your first week here, when I was reading to the patients?" He nodded. "I read to 17 people that day. 15 have family with them. One had friends visiting. You were the only one alone. I met his eyes. When I asked the nurse about you, she said you'd been here for 3 weeks without a single visitor. It broke my heart. Ah, he said softly, pity then. No, I said firmly, not pity. Recognition. I recognize something in you that I've always seen in myself. The tendency to give everything to your work, to your goals, until one day you look up and realize you've forgotten to build connections along the way. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. You're too young to be so wise, he finally said. And you're too important to be alone, I countered. He smiled, though his eyes were suddenly bright with unshed tears. Important? I'm just a foolish old man, who built one of the largest investment firms in the country, I finished, who revolutionized ethical investing practices, who created thousands of jobs and changed countless lives. Yeah, I did my research. Google? He asked, amused. LinkedIn, actually. Your profile needs updating, by the way. We both laughed, and the heavy moment passed. But something had shifted between us. A deeper understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits despite our differences in age and circumstances. As the week progressed, Thomas's condition began to deteriorate more rapidly. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about making him comfortable and managing expectations. But Thomas himself remained clear-eyed and determined. Sarah, he said one evening as the hospital settled into its nighttime routine, I need you to do something for me. Anything, I replied, and I meant it. In my briefcase, the one my secretary brought last month, there's a letter. I need you to deliver it for me. I found the briefcase tucked away in his room's small closet, its leather worn but still elegant. Inside was a sealed envelope, addressed simply to Victoria Marshall, CEO, Marshall & Associates Marketing. My heart stopped. Thomas. Yes, he said, watching my reaction carefully. Victoria Marshall, your former boss. Though she doesn't know it, her company's recent success is largely due to my firm's quiet investment and guidance. I stared at the envelope in my hands, my mind racing. You knew? All this time, you knew where I worked. He nodded. I recognized your company ID card that first day. I've been following Marshall & Associates' progress for years. It's one of my more interesting investments. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to get to know you as Sarah, not as an employee of a company I partially own. He shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. And I'm glad I did. It showed me exactly who you are, someone who would give up everything to help a stranger, even when it costs you dearly. I sat down heavily in my chair, the envelope feeling suddenly heavy in my hands. What's in the letter? The truth, he said simply. About investment strategies, about company direction, about leadership. He paused, his expression hardening slightly. About how true success isn't measured in quarterly profits or market share, but in how we treat people. I looked at the envelope, then back at Thomas. When do you want me to deliver it? Tomorrow, he said. I think it's time Victoria Marshall learned a few things about the real costs of success. As I left the hospital that night, the letter safely tucked in my bag, I couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. Victoria Marshall had tried to break me, thinking she held all the power. But sometimes, life has a way of evening the score, not through revenge or malice, but through simple truth and justice. Little did Victoria know, her world was about to change forever, and I had a front row seat to watch it happen. The next morning, I stood in front of Marshall & Associates' gleaming office building, Thomas's letter clutched in my hand. The same security guard who had wished me good morning every day for 3 years now looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry, Ms. Collins, but you're not on the approved visitor list anymore. Ms. Marshall's orders. I smiled, pulling out my phone. Could you please call up to Victoria's office? Tell her I have a letter from Thomas Edwards. The guard's eyes widened slightly at the name. Clearly, he recognized it. After a brief call, he handed me a visitor's badge, his expression puzzled. Ms. Marshall will see you immediately. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt surreal. Just a week ago, I'd been rushing up here, juggling presentation materials and coffee, desperately trying to balance my work life with my volunteer commitments. Now I was calmer than I'd ever been, knowing that what happened next would change everything. Victoria's assistant jumped up when I stepped out of the elevator. Ms. Marshall is waiting for you, she said, hurrying to open the office door. I noticed she couldn't quite meet my eyes. Word of my firing had clearly spread. Victoria sat behind her desk, her posture rigid, her expression carefully neutral. Sarah, she said coolly, I assume this isn't a misguided attempt to get your job back. I placed Thomas's letter on her desk. No, Victoria, this is a delivery from Thomas Edwards. She stared at the envelope, her perfectly manicured hand hovering over it. Thomas Edwards, the investor. The same. I sat down without being invited, enjoying the flash of annoyance that crossed her face. He asked me to deliver this personally. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she picked up the envelope. How do you know Thomas Edwards? He's my patient, I said simply. The one you fired me for helping. The color drained from Victoria's face as the implications hit her. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the letter, her eyes scanning the contents rapidly. I watched as her expression shifted from disbelief to horror to something close to panic. This can't be right, she whispered, more to herself than to me. What's wrong, Victoria? Not the letter you were expecting. She looked up at me, her usual composure completely shattered. He's pulling his investment. All of it, effective immediately. She shuffled through the papers frantically. This would ruin us. The Peterson account, the new office expansion, everything. It's all backed by his firm. I know, I said quietly. You know. Her voice rose sharply. You knew about this and you didn't say anything. When exactly should I have mentioned it? While you were firing me, or while you were threatening to blacklist me from the industry? Victoria stood up abruptly, starting to pace behind her desk. We have to fix this. You have to help me fix this. Talk to him, explain that it was all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I interrupted, my voice hardening. You fired me for trying to help a dying man. You mocked my compassion and treated basic human decency like a character flaw. That wasn't a misunderstanding, Victoria. That was a choice. She stopped pacing, turning to face me. Please, she said, and I was shocked to hear real desperation in her voice. I'll give you your job back, a promotion, a raise, whatever you want. Just help me save this. I thought about Thomas, lying in his hospital bed, still thinking of others even as his own time grew short. I thought about all the employees at Marshall and Associates who lived in fear of Victoria's moods and arbitrary decisions. I thought about Jenny from accounting crying in the bathroom after another public humiliation, and Mark from creative who had missed his daughter's recital because Victoria demanded last-minute changes to a presentation. I don't want my job back, I said finally, but I will tell you what Thomas told me to say when you made this offer. She leaned forward eagerly. Yes. He says you have a choice. You can keep his investment, keep your position, keep everything, but only if you agree to some changes. What changes? I pulled out another envelope, this one containing the document Thomas had drafted late last night. Complete restructuring of the company's management style. Implementation of proper work-life balance policies, fair medical leave, regular employee satisfaction surveys with real consequences for poor leadership. Oh, and, I pause, enjoying the moment, I'll be overseeing the changes as the new director of employee relations. Victoria's jaw dropped. You're joking. Thomas Edwards doesn't joke about business, I said. You have until the end of the day to decide. Accept these terms or watch everything you've built crumble. She sank into her chair, all pretense of superiority gone. He's really dying, isn't he? Yes, I said softly. He is, and his last act in business will either be saving this company from its toxic culture or making an example of it. The choice is yours. Victoria stared at the documents for a long moment. Finally, she looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something like respect in her eyes. You planned this, didn't you? Getting close to him, telling him about the company. I shook my head. No, Victoria. I just showed kindness to someone who needed it. Everything else, I gestured to the letters on her desk. This was all Thomas. He's been watching this company for years, waiting to see if you'd grow into the kind of leader he could trust. Last week, you showed him exactly who you are. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Victoria picked up a pen, her hand only slightly shaking as she signed the documents. I assume you'll want your own office. Corner office, I corrected. With a view. And I start next week. When I left Victoria's office, the whole floor was eerily quiet. Word would spread soon enough about what had happened, but for now, I savored the peace. I had one more stop to make. Thomas was sleeping when I returned to the hospital, his breathing shallow but steady. I sat in my usual chair, taking his frail hand in mine. "It's done," I said softly. She signed everything. His eyes fluttered open, and a small smile crossed his face. Never doubted she would. Victoria Marshall isn't stupid. Ruthless, maybe, but not stupid. "Thank you," I said, squeezing his hand gently. "For everything." He shook his head slightly. "No, Sarah. Thank you. You showed me that even at the end, it's possible to make a difference, to leave things better than we found them." Over the next few days, I split my time between the hospital and the office, setting up the new policies that would transform Marshall and Associates. Victoria, to her credit, threw herself into the changes with the same intensity she'd once used to terrorize her employees. Maybe she was just protecting her investment, or maybe something had genuinely shifted in her understanding of leadership. Thomas held on long enough to see the first employee satisfaction survey results, smiling weakly as I read him the overwhelmingly positive responses. "See," he whispered. "Sometimes the best investments are in people." He passed away peacefully 3 days later, holding my hand as I read to him from The Great Gatsby, his final joke about inappropriate book choices for a hospital ward. At his memorial service, I was surprised by the number of people who attended. Not just business associates and employees, but people whose lives he had touched in quiet ways. Scholarship recipients, small business owners he'd mentored, charity workers he'd supported anonymously. Victoria was there too, standing quietly at the back, looking thoughtful. A month later, I sat in my new corner office, reviewing applications for our expanded employee assistance program. Jenny from accounting poked her head in, grinning. "You'll never believe what just happened," she said. "Victoria approved all the flexible working requests. All of them," and she smiled while doing it. I laughed, glancing at the photo of Thomas I kept on my desk. "People can surprise you sometimes," I said, "especially when someone shows them a better way." As I looked out over the city skyline, I thought about how life has a way of coming full circle. Victoria had fired me for showing compassion, thinking it was a weakness. Instead, that same compassion had led me to Thomas, who showed us all that true strength lies in how we treat others. The company culture at Marshall and Associates was transforming, slowly but surely. Victoria was learning to balance ambition with empathy, and employees were finally feeling valued and heard. It wasn't perfect. Change never is, but it was progress. Every morning, as I walked into the building, I remembered Thomas's words. Sometimes the best investments are in people. He had invested in me when I was just a volunteer reader, seeing something worth nurturing. Now I was investing in others, creating the kind of workplace where kindness wasn't seen as weakness, and where success was measured not just in profits, but in the lives we touched. Victoria still had her moments of old habits creeping back, but now there was a system in place to check her worst impulses. More importantly, she was beginning to see the benefits of a happier, more loyal workforce. Productivity was up, turnover was down, and our reputation in the industry was soaring. 1 year to the day after Thomas's passing, I received a package from his lawyers. Inside was a letter, written in his familiar shaky handwriting during his final days. "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, a year has passed since our paths crossed. I hope by now you've seen the fruits of our little experiment in corporate transformation. But more than that, I hope you've realized something about yourself. You see, when you walked into my hospital room that first day, I didn't just see someone with a kind heart. I saw a leader, someone who understood that true power comes not from authority, but from empathy, someone who could change not just one company, but potentially an entire industry's approach to human capital. That's why I've left you something else: voting shares in my investment firm. Use them wisely. Look for other companies like Marshall and Associates, businesses with potential held back by toxic leadership. Change them too. You once told me that you gave up your job because you recognized something in me. Well, I recognize something in you too, the future of ethical business leadership. Make me proud. With gratitude and faith, Thomas." I sat in my office for a long time after reading that letter, watching the sun set over the city. In my inbox were dozens of emails from other companies asking about our transformation, wanting to know our secret. On my desk were reports showing record profits alongside unprecedented employee satisfaction scores. Victoria knocked on my door, holding 2 cups of coffee, a peace offering that had become our weekly tradition. Good news, she said, handing me a cup. The Peterson account just renewed their contract. They said it's because of our new corporate culture initiatives. I smiled, thinking of that day a year ago when she fired me over this same account. Funny how things work out, isn't it? She nodded, looking thoughtful. You know, I never thanked you properly for what you and Thomas did. You could have destroyed this company, but instead you saved it. Saved me too, if I'm being honest. Thank Thomas, I said softly. He believed in the power of second chances. And third and fourth, Victoria added with a wry smile. I should know. As she left my office, I looked again at Thomas's letter. Make me proud, he'd written. But I knew he already was proud, not just of me, but of every person in this building who had embraced change, who had learned to balance profit with compassion, who had discovered that success and kindness weren't mutually exclusive. Tomorrow, I would start looking at other companies, seeking out those who needed the same transformation. But for now, I sat in my corner office, sipping coffee and watching the city lights come alive, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought me to Thomas's hospital room, and for the chain of events that proved sometimes losing everything is the first step to gaining something better. The next morning, as I walked into the building, the security guard who had once apologetically turned me away now greeted me with a warm smile. Good morning, Miss Collins, making any lives better today. I thought about Thomas, about Victoria, about all the changes we'd made and all the changes still to come. Every day, I replied. That's what good investments are all about. And somewhere I knew Thomas was smiling. Grandma wants to see you. I looked up from my laptop to find my sister Victoria standing in my doorway, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against the frame. Something about her expression made my stomach tighten, a hint of smugness that seemed out of place given our grandmother's condition. I just saw her this morning, I said, checking the time. It was barely past noon. Dr. Mitchell said she needed rest. Victoria's lips curved into what might have been a smile, but there was nothing warm about it. Well, she's asking for you now, unless you're too busy with your little writing projects to spend time with our dying grandmother. The jab was typical Victoria, always finding ways to diminish my work as a novelist while flaunting her own success in real estate. I closed my laptop and stood, refusing to take the bait. I'll go now. My name is Olivia Bennett, and for the past 3 months, I've been living in my grandmother Eleanor's mansion, helping care for her as pancreatic cancer slowly took her from us. Victoria visited occasionally, usually when the lawyers were around, but I was the one who sat with Grandma through sleepless nights, who held her hand during chemo, who read to her when her eyes were too tired to focus on the pages herself. The mansion's long hallways echoed with memories as I made my way to Grandma's room. Every antique, every painting, every creaking floorboard had a story. I'd grown up exploring these corridors, discovering hidden nooks and treating a whole place like my personal wonderland. Victoria had always preferred the country club, spending time with the right people, building connections she could use later. Outside Grandma's door, I paused. Voices drifted through the heavy oak, Victoria's lawyer, Mr. Whitman, and someone from the bank. My heart sank. This wasn't a social call. I knocked softly and entered to find Grandma propped up in her massive 4-poster bed, looking frailer than she had that morning. Victoria stood by the window, that same smug smile playing at her lips. 2 men in expensive suits sat in the antique chairs by the bed. Olivia, darling, Grandma said, her voice weaker than I remembered. Come sit with me. I moved to her side, taking her thin hand in mine. Her skin felt like paper, so delicate I was afraid it might tear. Should I come back later? I asked, eyeing the lawyers. No, Mr. Whitman said smoothly. We've finished our business. Your grandmother just needs to sign a few papers. Victoria stepped forward, holding out an elegant fountain pen. Grandpa's old one, I realized with a start. It's all ready, Grandma, just like we discussed. Something felt wrong. Grandma's hand trembled as she took the pen, and her signature was barely legible as she scratched it across the documents. Mr. Whitman gathered them quickly, tucking them into his briefcase with an efficiency that seemed almost rehearsed. What was that about? I asked after they'd left, trying to keep my voice casual. Just some updates to my will, dear, Grandma said, her eyes already drooping. Victoria's been so helpful, explaining all the legal terminology. She drifted off to sleep before finishing the sentence. I tucked the blankets around her, my mind racing. Victoria had never shown much interest in legal matters before, unless there was something in it for her. She's just trying to make things easier, Victoria said from the doorway, as if reading my thoughts. Unlike some people, I actually understand business matters. I turned to face her. What did you do, Victoria? She examined her perfect manicure, unbothered by my tone. I helped Grandma make some sensible decisions about her estate. Someone had to, while you were busy playing nurse and working on your little stories. They're not stories, I said, fighting to keep my voice down. I'm a published author. My last book was nominated for. Yes, some literary award nobody's heard of. She waved her hand dismissively. Meanwhile, I've tripled my real estate portfolio this year alone. I know how to manage wealth, Olivia. How to make it grow. Grandma understands that. Before I could respond, Grandma stirred in her sleep, making a small sound of distress. I hurried back to her side, adjusting her pillows and checking her pain medication levels. By the time I looked up again, Victoria was gone. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered the mansion's dark halls. The place felt different after sunset, more mysterious, as if the antiques and artwork were trying to tell me something. I found myself in Grandma's library, a vast room lined with leather-bound books and family photographs. A picture on her desk caught my eye, me at my college graduation, standing between Grandma and Grandpa. His proud smile, Grandma's elegant pose, my own face beat me with possibility. Grandpa had passed away 2 years later, leaving Grandma to manage their considerable fortune alone. She'd done more than manage it. Eleanor Bennett was a force of nature, turning my grandfather's successful manufacturing business into a diverse empire of investments and real estate. Victoria liked to brag about her business acumen, but she learned everything she knew from Grandma. Movement in the hallway made me freeze. Victoria's voice drifted through the door, speaking in hushed tones on her phone. It's done. No, she has no idea. The old woman signed everything today. Trust me, by this time next month, it'll all be mine. My blood ran cold. The smugness, the lawyers, the mysterious documents, it all made sense now. Victoria had somehow convinced Grandma to change her will, probably taking advantage of the confusion caused by her medication. I wanted to confront her immediately, to wake Grandma and demand answers, but I knew that in her weakened state, any confrontation could be dangerous for her. I needed to be smart about this to figure out exactly what Victoria had done before making my move. The next morning, I called the one person who might be able to help. Mark Sullivan, my best friend since college and now a junior partner at a law firm across town. A new will? He said when I explained my suspicions. That's tricky, Liv. She was competent when she signed it. She's on heavy pain medication, I argued. Victoria must have caught her during a lucid moment, but you know how the drugs affect her judgment. Mark sighed. Look, I can make some discreet inquiries, but unless we can prove undue influence or lack of capacity, there might not be much we can do. I spent the next few weeks gathering evidence while continuing to care for Grandma. Her decline accelerated, and soon she was sleeping most of the day. Victoria visited more frequently now, always with documents for Grandma to sign, always when she was most heavily medicated. I documented everything: dates, times, medications, who was present. I took photos of the pill bottles, noted Grandma's mental state, recorded conversations when I could, but it felt like trying to hold back the tide with a paper cup. One afternoon, I was helping Grandma sort through some old photographs when she suddenly gripped my hand with surprising strength. The blue room, she whispered, her eyes intense. Behind the painting of the lighthouse. Remember. Before I could ask what she meant, Victoria swept in with another lawyer in tow. Grandma, Mr. Patterson is here about those property transfers we discussed. I was ushered out of the room, Grandma's cryptic message echoing in my mind. The blue room had been her private study, a place where even Victoria and I weren't allowed to play as children. And the lighthouse painting, I remembered it hanging above an antique writing desk, one of Grandma's favorite pieces. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I slipped into the blue room. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting strange shadows on the walls. The lighthouse painting hung exactly where I remembered, its pale beam seeming to wink at me in the darkness. I reached for the frame, my heart pounding. It swung away from the wall easily, revealing a small wall safe behind it. But without the combination, it was useless. I tried a few meaningful dates. Grandma's birthday, the day she married Grandpa, the year the company was founded. Nothing worked. A noise in the hallway sent me scrambling back to my room, the safe's contents remaining a mystery. The next day, Grandma took a turn for the worse. The hospice nurse increased her medication, and she drifted in and out of consciousness. Victoria practically moved into the mansion, bringing an endless parade of lawyers and bankers through Grandma's room. I kept trying to get a moment alone with Grandma to ask about the safe, but Victoria was always there, hovering, controlling access like a jealous guard dog. 2 weeks later, Grandma Eleanor Bennett passed away quietly in her sleep. I was holding her hand when it happened, reading to her from her favorite Jane Austen novel. Victoria was at a business lunch. The funeral was exactly the kind of elaborate affair Victoria loved. Hundreds of guests, expensive flowers, catered reception at the country club. I sat in the front row, numb with grief, while Victoria worked the crowd like a politician at a fundraiser. Such a tragedy, I overheard her telling someone. But at least everything's been properly arranged. The estate will be in capable hands. The will reading was scheduled for the following Monday. As I drove to the lawyer's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. Victoria's new Mercedes was already parked outside, gleaming in the morning sun like a well-polished threat. Mr. Whitman's office was all dark wood and leather, the kind of place that reeked of old money and quiet power. Victoria sat in one of the visitor chairs, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than I made in 3 months as a writer. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Whitman asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. What happened next felt like watching a car crash in slow motion. The new will, signed just weeks before Grandma's death, left everything: the mansion, the business interests, the investments, everything to Victoria. My inheritance had been reduced to a small trust fund that would pay out a modest monthly stipend. "Are you sure this is right?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Grandma always said she wanted to split things equally. "The previous will was revoked," Mr. Whitman said smoothly. "Your grandmother was very clear about her final wishes." Victoria stood, gathering her designer purse. "Well, I should get started. There's so much to manage." She paused by my chair, her smile sharp as a razor. "Don't worry, little sister. I'll let you keep your room in the mansion. For now, though you might want to start looking for a small apartment, something more appropriate to your means." I sat there long after they'd left, staring at the copy of the will in my hands. Everything we'd grown up believing, all of Grandma's promises about preserving the family legacy for both of us, gone with a few strokes of a pen. But as I drove back to the mansion, no longer my home, I realized with a fresh wave of pain. I remembered Grandma's last cryptic message. The blue room. The lighthouse painting. She'd been trying to tell me something. That night, I waited until Victoria retired to the master suite. She'd already moved into Grandma's room before making my way to the blue room. The lighthouse painting watched as I once again tried to crack the safe's combination. Just as I was about to give up, a memory surfaced. Grandma teaching me to play chess when I was 7, telling me that sometimes the best move isn't the most obvious one. On a hunch, I tried the chess notation for her favorite opening move, E4. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single envelope, my name written in Grandma's elegant handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, and what I found inside would change everything. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that the game wasn't over, it was just beginning. My hands trembled as I unfolded the contents of Grandma's envelope. Inside I found a letter, a small brass key, and what looked like a bank statement from the Cayman Islands. "My dearest Olivia," the letter began in Grandma's familiar elegant script. "If you're reading this, then 2 things have happened. I'm no longer with you, and Victoria has shown her true colors. I've watched her manipulate and scheme her way through life, always taking the easy path, never understanding the true value of what we built. But you, my darling girl, you have your grandfather's heart and my mind, a dangerous combination." I sank into Grandma's old leather chair, my heart pounding as I continued reading. "The key enclosed opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 2247. What you find inside will help you restore balance to our family legacy. Victoria believes she knows everything about our family's wealth. But your grandfather and I were smarter than that. We never kept all our eggs in one basket." The bank statement showed a balance that made my eyes widen. Over $50 million in an offshore account completely separate from the family's known assets. "But be careful, my dear," the letter continued. "Victoria is more dangerous than you know. The night your grandfather died wasn't the peaceful passing everyone believes it to be. I've spent years gathering evidence, protecting you both while trying to understand the truth. Now that burden passes to you." I nearly dropped the letter. Was Grandma suggesting that Victoria had something to do with Grandpa's death? The implications were staggering. A noise in the hallway made me quickly return everything to the safe except the key, which I slipped into my pocket. Just in time, Victoria appeared in the doorway, wearing silk pajamas that probably cost more than my car. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded, eyes narrowing. "Just remembering," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. This was always Grandma's favorite room. "Well, it's my house now," she said, walking in and running her hand possessively along the antique desk. "And I'm thinking of renovating. All these old things, they're so dated." I watched her examine the lighthouse painting, my heart racing. Did she know about the safe behind it? But she just wrinkled her nose and moved on. "You should start packing," she added casually. "I'm having the house redecorated next week, and your room needs to be cleared out." The will said I could stay. "The will gives me full control of the property," she cut in, her smile sharp. "And I'm exercising that control. You have until Friday." After she left, I sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about Grandma's letter. If what she suggested was true, my sister wasn't just greedy. She was dangerous. The next morning, I called Mark. "I need your help," I said when he picked up. "What do you know about Cayman Islands banking laws?" "Enough to know I should pretend you didn't ask me that," he replied. "What's going on, Liv?" We met at a small cafe far from the mansion, where I showed him copies I'd made of the documents from the safe. His eyes widened as he read. "This is significant," he said finally. "If these accounts exist, they were never included in the estate inventory. And these allegations about your grandfather's death. Can you help me access the safety deposit box?" I asked. "I don't want to do it alone." He nodded slowly. "First thing tomorrow. But Liv, be careful. If Victoria realizes what you found—" "She won't," I assured him, though my stomach churned at the thought. That afternoon, as I packed my room, I found myself looking at old family photos. One in particular caught my eye. Victoria and me as children, standing with Grandpa in his study. He was showing us his collection of rare coins, something that had fascinated us both as kids. Victoria was holding one, smiling at the camera, while I examined another with a magnifying glass. The memory hit me suddenly, Grandpa teaching us about numismatics, explaining how some coins were worth millions to the right collector. His collection had been extensive, worth a fortune, but after his death. "The coins," I whispered, "they hadn't been listed in any of the estate inventories. At the time, everyone assumed they'd been sold years ago, but what if?" The next morning, Mark met me outside First National Bank just as it opened. The process of accessing the safety deposit box was surprisingly straightforward. Grandma had already added my name to the access list. When the bank officer left us alone in the viewing room, my hands shook as I inserted the key. Inside the box was another envelope, a USB drive, and a small leather-bound notebook. "Your grandfather's journal," I breathed, recognizing his handwriting. The envelope contained detailed records of transactions, offshore account numbers, and most importantly, a complete inventory of Grandpa's coin collection, which, according to the documents, had been secretly moved to a private vault in Switzerland just days before his death. "Look at this," Mark said, pointing to one of the transaction records. "A wire transfer from Victoria's personal account to an unlisted number in the Cayman Islands, dated the day before your grandfather died." "But she was just starting out then," I said, frowning. "She wouldn't have had this kind of money." "Unless she was working with someone else," Mark suggested. "Someone who stood to gain from your grandfather's death." The USB drive contained video files, security footage from the mansion's old camera system. With trembling fingers, I plugged it into my laptop. The footage was grainy but clear enough. It showed Victoria in Grandpa's study late at night, arguing with a man I didn't recognize. The timestamp showed it was the night before Grandpa died. "You promised me control," Victoria was saying. "Once he's gone, I get everything." The man's response was inaudible, but his body language was threatening. Victoria looked scared but determined. The next clip showed Grandpa in his study the following evening, drinking from his usual whiskey glass. Hours later, the cameras caught Victoria and the same man removing something from the study. Grandpa's briefcase. The one he always kept his most important documents in. This is evidence of conspiracy, Mark whispered. But to prove murder, we'd need more. I opened Grandpa's journal, flipping to the last entries. His normally neat handwriting was shaky, urgent. V meeting with M again. Can't trust. Changed my will today. Eleanor knows something's wrong. Coins moved. Safe in Zurich. Account numbers in. The rest was illegible, but it was enough. Grandpa had known something was wrong. He tried to protect the family's assets, working with Grandma to move things offshore before it was too late. We need to move carefully, Mark advised. Victoria has legal control of the estate right now. One wrong move, and she could liquidate everything before we can stop her. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Moving company arrives tomorrow at 9. Anything left in your room gets thrown out. I looked at Mark, my mind racing. How quickly can you file an injunction? Give me an hour with these documents, he said, already pulling out his phone. And Liv, don't go back to the mansion alone. But I had to go back. There was something else in the blue room safe, something I'd glimpsed but hadn't had time to grab. A small red notebook that could only be Grandma's private diary. I'll be careful, I promised, gathering the documents. Just get that injunction. As I drove back to the mansion, storm clouds gathered overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a warning of things to come. Victoria's Mercedes was in the driveway, along with an unfamiliar black SUV. I let myself in quietly, making my way to the blue room. But as I approached, I heard voices. Victoria and a man, arguing in heated whispers. She knows something, the man was saying. His voice was familiar, the same one from the security footage. The bank called. She accessed the box this morning. Impossible, Victoria snapped. She's nothing but a wannabe writer. She doesn't know anything about. I must have made a noise because they both suddenly fell silent, then footsteps headed toward the door. I turned to run, but I wasn't fast enough. Well, Victoria said from behind me, her voice cold as ice. It seems my little sister has been quite busy today. I spun around to face her and the man. Tall, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that assessed me like I was a bug to be squashed. Missing something, Victoria asked, holding up Grandma's red diary. Maybe this? The man took a step forward, and I realized I was trapped between them and the stairs. We need to talk, little sister, Victoria said, her smile sharp as broken glass. About family secrets and why some of them should stay buried. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the scene like a macabre photograph. In that instant, I saw something in Victoria's eyes I'd never seen before. Not just greed or anger, but genuine darkness. And I knew that everything was about to change. Thunder cracked overhead as I faced my sister and her mysterious companion in the mansion's dark hallway. Victoria held Grandma's diary like a weapon, her manicured nails digging into its worn red cover. Marcus, why don't you make sure we're not interrupted? Victoria said, her eyes never leaving my face. The man, Marcus, moved to block the stairs, effectively cutting off my escape route. Now then, Victoria continued, stepping closer. Let's discuss what you found in that safety deposit box. My mind raced. Mark would be filing the injunction soon, but legal protection wouldn't help if I didn't make it out of here. I needed to play this carefully. Just some old photos, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Memories of better times. Before you started conspiring to kill our grandfather. The words hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's perfectly composed expression cracked for just a moment, surprise, then fear, then something darker flashing across her face. You always did have an overactive imagination, she said, but her voice wavered slightly. All those silly stories you write. Is that what this is? Another one of your fantasies? The security footage isn't a fantasy, I shot back. Neither are the bank records showing your payment to Marcus the night before Grandpa died. Marcus took a step forward, but Victoria held up her hand to stop him. You have no idea what you're talking about, she said. What happened to Grandpa was unfortunate, but natural. Everyone knows that. Grandma knew better. I nodded toward the diary in her hands. That's why she kept records, isn't it? Why she spent years gathering evidence. She was protecting me while building a case against you. Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle. Protecting you? Poor, naive Olivia. Grandma was protecting her money just like everyone else in this family. Why do you think she changed her will at the end? Because you manipulated her while she was dying. I helped her see reason, Victoria snapped. This family's wealth needs someone strong to manage it, someone who understands business, not some dreamer who spends her time making up stories. Is that what you told Grandpa too? I asked quietly, before even Marcus poisoned his whiskey. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My cheek stung as Victoria grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. You need to be very careful about what accusations you make, she hissed. Just then, both our phones buzzed simultaneously. Victoria kept her grip on my arm as she checked her screen. I watched her face pale as she read what I knew must be a notice of the injunction Mark had filed. What did you do? She demanded, shaking me. A calm settled over me, the kind of clarity that comes when you know you finally gained the upper hand. I did exactly what Grandma and Grandpa prepared me to do. I protected our family's true legacy. Marcus. Victoria's voice rose with panic. She's frozen our access to the estate. Call Harrison. Tell him to start liquidating everything now. That won't work, I said, unable to keep the satisfaction from my voice. The offshore accounts, the coin collection in Switzerland, none of it was ever part of the estate. Grandpa moved everything before he died, didn't he? That's why you were so angry that night. He'd outmaneuvered you. Victoria's grip loosened as realization dawned in her eyes. The coins. How did you? Grandma left me a key, but not just to the safety deposit box. She left me the key to everything. All the accounts, all the documentation, all the evidence against you. It's already in the hands of the authorities. The sound of cars pulling up outside made Victoria's head snap around. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, illuminating the hallway in an eerie strobe. Police, a voice called from downstairs. Victoria Bennett, we have a warrant. Marcus bolted toward the back stairs, but Victoria remained frozen, staring at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. You're bluffing, she whispered. You couldn't possibly have. I pulled out my phone and played the security footage, not the grainy version from the USB drive, but a crystal clear copy showing Victoria and Marcus in Grandpa's study, discussing payment details and poison dosages. Grandma upgraded the security system after Grandpa died, I explained. Installed hidden cameras everywhere. She knew you'd try again eventually. Victoria lunged for my phone, but I was ready this time. I stepped back, letting her momentum carry her past me. She stumbled, Grandma's diary flying from her hands. It hit the floor and split open, spilling photographs and documents across the hardwood. Footsteps thundered up the stairs as police officers swarmed the hallway. Victoria tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. I watched in silence as they handcuffed my sister, reading her rights as they led her away. One of the detectives stayed behind to take my statement. As I described discovering Grandma's letter and the evidence she gathered, I couldn't help but look through the scattered contents of her diary. Among the papers was a photograph I'd never seen before. Grandma and Grandpa on their wedding day, young and radiant with possibility. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, the detective said, following my gaze. She contacted us months ago, sharing her suspicions, but she needed time to gather concrete evidence. That's why she played along with Victoria's manipulation, I realized. She was protecting me while building an airtight case. Hours later, after the police had finished processing the scene, I sat alone in the blue room. The lighthouse painting still hung on the wall, now hiding an empty safe, but its secrets had served their purpose. My phone buzzed, a message from Mark. Just heard from the Swiss bank. The coin collection is intact. Estimated value, $75 million. Call me when you can. I leaned back in Grandma's chair, emotion washing over me in waves. Victoria and Marcus were in custody, along with several co-conspirators including Mr. Whitman, who had helped orchestrate the fake will changes. The family's true assets were secure, and more importantly, Grandpa would finally have justice. A soft knock at the door made me look up. Anna, our housekeeper of 20 years, stood there with tears in her eyes. Miss Olivia, she said. I should have told you sooner. The night your grandfather died, I saw. I stood and took her hands in mine. It's okay, Anna. We know everything now. She nodded, squeezing my hands. Your grandmother was so proud of you. She knew you'd be the one to make things right. As if to emphasize her words, I noticed something carved into the arm of Grandma's chair. tiny letters worn smooth by years of use. Truth prevails. Over the next few weeks, the full story emerged. Victoria had partnered with Marcus, a corrupt investment banker, to gain control of the family fortune. They'd started with Grandpa, thinking his death would leave everything vulnerable. But Grandpa had suspected something was wrong and had taken steps to protect his legacy. Grandma had carried on his work, carefully documenting Victoria's crimes while appearing to be a helpless victim. She'd known my sister would try to take advantage of her illness, and she used that assumption to lay a perfect trap. The investigation uncovered other victims, wealthy families whose fortunes had mysteriously disappeared after dealing with Marcus's investment firm. Victoria had been his inside connection to high society, helping him identify targets while building her own real estate empire on stolen money. I donated most of Grandpa's coin collection to museums, keeping just a few special pieces he'd shown me as a child. The offshore accounts were restructured into a charitable foundation, funding arts education and literacy programs, causes that would have made Grandma smile. The mansion felt different now, lighter somehow. I kept most of the antiques but opened up the dark rooms, letting in sun and fresh air. The blue room became my writing study, the lighthouse painting still keeping watch over its empty safe. One evening, about 6 months after Victoria's arrest, I found myself looking through old family albums. There was a picture of all of us, Grandma, Grandpa, Victoria, and me, taken at my high school graduation. Everyone was smiling, looking like the perfect family. Appearances can be deceiving, Grandma had always said. But the truth has a way of coming out. She'd left me more than just money and evidence. She'd left me a lesson about patience, about justice, about the power of playing the long game. Victoria had always thought strength meant taking what you wanted. She never understood that true strength lies in protecting what matters. The next morning, I visited Victoria in prison. She looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced by a drab uniform, her perfect makeup gone. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I placed Grandma's diary on a table between us. "Because you should know who she really was, who they both were." Victoria stared at the diary, her hands twitching as if she wanted to grab it. "They never trusted me," she said bitterly, "always favored you." "They trusted both of us," I corrected. "You're the one who betrayed that trust." I left her there with the diary, knowing she'd finally understand the full scope of her failure. Not just the loss of money or freedom, but the loss of something far more valuable, the legacy of two people who had built something worth protecting. Back at the mansion, I walked through rooms filled with memories, the antiques that had witnessed our family's rise and fall, the photographs that told stories both true and false, the quiet corners where a little girl once played while her grandmother watched, planning, preparing, protecting. In the blue room, I sat at my desk and began to write. Not a novel this time, but a different kind of story. The true story of Eleanor Bennett, who had outmaneuvered her enemies from beyond the grave. Of William Bennett, who had sacrificed everything to protect his legacy. Of a sister consumed by greed, and another sister who found strength in truth. Outside, the sun set behind the lighthouse painting, its beam seeming to wink at me one last time. I touched Mom's sapphire pendant, a piece of the inheritance that really mattered, and smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply letting the truth come to light, one carefully planned revelation at a time. I am Olivia Bennett, guardian of my family's true legacy. Not the money or the mansion or the rare coins, but the wisdom to know that wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the choices we make, the truths we protect, and the stories we leave behind. And my story was just beginning.